statement for the his bill, the Mental Health Bill. Let's kick it off.
3.
Mental Health Bill, first reading.
Speaker.
Honourable Matt Doocey.
I present a legislative statement on the Mental Health Bill.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website. Honourable Matt Doocey.
I move that the Mental Health Bill be now read a first time. I nominate the Health Committee to consider the bill. Madam Speaker, it is a serious step when the state intervenes and takes control of your life. The current Mental Health Act has been criticised for not being aligned with the dominant models of mental health care in New Zealand. This bill is needed to ensure we have modern compulsory mental health care legislation. People who are subject to the legislation come from all walks of life. They could be a family member, a friend, neighbour or a professional or leader in our communities. These are everyday New Zealanders experiencing mental distress at a level requiring state intervention to support their recovery. It is important that the bill comes in today with full support across all political parties in Parliament. As New Zealand's first Mental Health Minister, it is important to me that Parliament takes a bipartisan approach to addressing mental health in New Zealand. This builds on the kaupapa, started with Chloe Swarbrick, Lewissa Wall and myself 5 years ago when we first met to set up New Zealand Parliament's first cross-party mental health group to develop long-term policy solutions irrespective of 3-year parliamentary cycles. It is important to see this bipartisan approach to mental health continue to thrive here tonight. Madam Speaker, can I start by acknowledging those with lived experience, specifically those who have lived experience with compulsory mental health care in New Zealand. I do hope that you will see your voices, your stories in this bill. We need to do better. I want to thank you for sharing your experiences to date, and I'd like to encourage those who are still to share their story to make a submission in the Select Committee process so we can ensure those with lived experience are heard. I'd also like to acknowledge those who bravely came forward to share their stories in the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Historical Abuse in State Care and in the care of faith-based institutions. For some, talking about compulsory mental health care will be difficult. It is important to state that this bill will contribute to at least 10 of the abuse and care recommendations relating primarily to care safety and monitoring. My vision is an effective and comprehensive mental health and addiction continuum that puts people at the centre of their care. Making sure we have legislation that can support people who are experiencing the most acute mental distress is a key part of that continuum. That is what we are here for today. Back in 2018, there was a government inquiry into mental health and addiction. The resulting report, He Ara Oranga, recognised that the Mental Health Act was out of date. The report recommended new legislation that reflects a human rights-based approach, promotes supported decision-making, aligns with the recovery and wellbeing model of mental health, and provides measures to minimise compulsory or coercive treatment. In 2021, the current Act was amended, which, as I said at the time, it was an important step in addressing the He Ara Oranga recommendations, but ultimately a small step. I'm very pleased to be taking the next major step by introducing this bill to the House. This bill will modernise compulsory mental health care in New Zealand. The current Act has received substantial criticism and challenges both domestically and internationally. That includes what we heard through the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Historical Abuse in State Care and the care of faith-based institutions. Many of those 2,400 survivors who courageously shared their stories and their experiences with the government and the public spent time in mental health facilities. This bill forms part of the government's response to the recommendations of the inquiry's final report, particularly those recommendations relating to care safety. This bill supports a future focus on safe and effective mental health care for people that require state intervention. This bill will be a critical safety net for those experiencing severe mental distress who are unable to engage in decision-making about their own mental health care. It is intended to be used as a last resort only. When this happens, a person is required to receive care either in the community or, if that is not appropriate, in an inpatient setting such as a hospital. This does not cover all specialist mental health service users. In fact, only around 6.4% of service users are subject to the Mental Health Act at any given time. But that is still over 11,000 Kiwis, people receiving compulsory care either in the community or in a hospital setting. I know that for those experiencing the most severe mental distress, compulsory care can have a significant impact on their lives and their loved ones. It can be a lifelong influence on people's ability to live independently and engage productively in their communities. I want to highlight the 3 big shifts I expect to see under this bill. Firstly, this bill is about providing more effective care. Compulsory mental health care is not a new concept, but how it is delivered is out of date and no longer represents current best practice. The legislation will support care being delivered in a way that minimises coercion and is responsive to individual needs. This will bring compulsory care in line with modern clinical practice in New Zealand. Placing a person at the centre of their care will also support safer ways of working, which will improve outcomes for people under the legislation, their families and communities. Secondly, the bill will recognise people's decision-making capacity. This is why one of the most significant aspects of the bill is its approach to embedding supported decision-making. At its core, this is about putting measures in place so that people can be actively involved and assisted to make decisions about their own mental health care. You'll see that the bill has measures in place to support people before they become unwell, such as through compulsory care directives. It also includes key protections when people are under the legislation, such as duties to ensure participation. Empowering individuals is fundamental to this bill. Thirdly, the bill introduces far greater protections and safeguards. The bill will ensure people understand what is happening to them and why they're entitled and what they're entitled to when they are under the legislation. One of the aspects I'm particularly pleased to be speaking to are new independent support and advocacy roles under this bill. These roles will be critical to ensuring people have the support they need to be heard, as well as to understand and exercise their rights. People will also have more opportunities to have the decisions about them reviewed and more opportunities to exit the legislation if it is no longer needed. We also take a hard look at restricted practices, specifically the use of seclusion. This bill ensures there will be far greater monitoring and oversight. I recognise that there are a number of practices like these marred in history of inappropriate use, abuse and overuse. I am committed to seeing the reduction and elimination of seclusion over time. The bill has mechanisms to support far stricter use with the ability to prohibit seclusion once the system is ready. I'm sure restricted practices will be a critical topic of discussion and of high importance to submitters and the Select Committee. This bill has been driven, Madam Speaker, by the voice of New Zealanders, and I would take some time to thank all the individuals, the families, the organisations and others in the mental health sector who have shared their time and experiences through the public consultation process on the policy underpinning the bill back in 2021. I acknowledge there are diverse views on this piece of legislation and that people have engaged in this work in good faith. Developing this bill has involved carefully balancing all of those views. I have people who took part in the consultation look at the bill and see how all the different views have been considered. I hope this good faith engagement can continue across the House as the bill proceeds to the Health Committee and beyond. I commend this bill to the House.
Right. Like I said last time, Matt Doocey is my favourite bald guy in the National Party out of all the bald guys they've got. It's a shame that he's kind of going head-to-head against the other bald guy who doesn't seem that interested in mental health funding. But I'm glad that Matt Doocey is taking the report He Ara Oranga seriously, which is really refreshing to see from this coalition. So, credit where credit is due with this guy. Yep.
I agree, actually. I give him credit for having the passion for this bill because I seldom see that in health and wellbeing or disability-related policies coming forward when it's under this government. However, in this case, it has been, but this started well before this coalition got in. Everything's been there. I was on the. I'm sitting on the Law Commission advisory around the supported decision-making stuff, and something I've had a personal passion about. The one thing I found interesting is, did you put that on fast forward, or does he just?
Yes, yeah. So that was at 1.5 times speed. Otherwise, we'll be here all night long.
Well, I was wondering that. It was actually nice that it got through a lot quicker, but I thought I was starting to listen to a chipmunk. So just a little worried on that one. But coming back to the mental health bill, it's something I've had a real passion about. I was part of Justice Action Group, Colin Bergering, when we had Alistair that was autistic in the isolation for a number of years, and now he's in his own home with carers and he's happy. He's not lying on a mattress with nothing else there.
Was that the one that was at Porirua?
Yeah, I think it was, if I remember the place. I'm hopeless on remembering those kind of details, but I remember the context. And this is not unusual when it comes to certain groups that are marginalised even within the Mental Health Act. So this bill was aiming to go from substituted decision-making to supported decision-making, which was in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD, and particularly around Article 12. So I was an Indigenous advisor with Auntie Gail Rankin from Australia at that time when we were making these decisions. There was a huge fight with countries, especially around restraint, around rights of a person who has a mental health condition, or as they were calling it, psychosocial. They don't call it mental health in that arena. And the reason they do that, it takes it out of this concept we have around mental health and well-being, loony bins and all of those things. But by calling it psychosocial, it actually starts to shift the thinking away from the negative stereotypes into something more that we can understand. But for me, I think there's some good stuff in trying to look at reducing coercion in mental health treatment. As a lawyer for Auckland Disability Law in 2008, I remember having several clients that were under compulsory treatment ringing me to say that they were in hiding until the compulsory order goes away, reminding them that the order doesn't go away. They just got to find them and they'll enforce it. And it concerns me. Even though people say, well, isn't it better to be well than to be sick? The whole discussion around capacity at the UN was actually from people with psychosocial conditions saying, I have the right to stay unwell if I choose to. And they also have the consequences of making that choice. But for governments, for us, we all think, well, we should put these people under compulsory treatment. Why? Who does it benefit? And what do we call a mental health condition these days? Being gay was mental health once. Being who I am was mental health once, where they were allowed to convert us illegally. Being transgendered was mental health once. It's not. It's no longer. It's now recognised.
I mean, in Saudi Arabia, you can still get the death penalty for it.
Yep.
Well, you can for being gay, but apparently in some of the Muslim states, if you get the operation, you are fully accepted as a trans person because you're deemed as a woman. So
Yes,
there's
Iran does that.
Yes. And it's quite contradictory when you get authoritarian regimes that go one way and then they have this variation within that regime. But that's evident everywhere. But the supported decision-making stuff is really important too. Where once someone was excluded from handling their own money and stuff, we've got several nieces, nephews and mokos who are autistic to certain degrees. And one can't handle money, but he's capable of working. So, the balance of that stuff. But he has the right to make a decision on what he wants his money spent on. And they have that right to have a say in how they want things. And they have the right to get married. They have the right to have children. They have the right to live their lives. The guardian can only be there if that causes a problem. And supported decision-making is walking beside them rather than making the decision for them. The other is restraint treatment, which is hugely problematic. I think the main issue is, you can implement all the recommendations are good recommendations, but it comes down to resourcing and it comes down to staffing. Yep. And what are we seeing at the moment? Redundancies, people losing their jobs. We're seeing job cuts. They put money into mental health, but they gave $24 million to Mike King, $3 a child, really. And that doesn't really do the systemic change that we need. On the board of Odyssey House, we deal with alcohol and drug. We deal with a lot of those stuff that also comes into mental health. We need staff. We need the people to be well-resourced, and we need mental health to be well-resourced. Without both those things, we're going to keep struggling.
Now, just want to ask you on something here. Now, you probably know about Makati Sydney in Tauranga who got elected from a coma.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. I did hear there were that we're looking at possibilities to see if a next of kin could potentially, what was it called?
Give assent?
No, resign on his behalf. I got asked, well, what happens in that situation? I said, I don't think a doctor would sit there and deem him incapacitated to that stage to do it at this point in the process.
Well, you cannot let that person, there can be no decision made if they can't give consent. They haven't resigned, so they can't give consent to resigning.
Exactly.
And they have time and the right to be able to choose once they are capable again, if they are.
Well, and that was the thing there was, because it was it was something that got brought up was, well, can they do this, can this not? I said, for that step to take place, I doubt a doctor would sign it off literally the moment the election day occurred. That sort of thing. But that was something that went around there with Makati Sydney was the fact that because he had brilliant, excellent health during the campaign and then had health needs that basically put him into a coma right between if you look between the It's in the Ballot show and election day, it was just like, what the hell happened? And yeah, that was something that actually got brought up in there. But yeah, there was something that was said there. Can a parent go, no, sorry, he's not able to take the seat. Can you take the next person off the list? Which, no, you wouldn't be able to do that under the Electoral Act.
No, you'd have to really require more information. You need the doctors to give the evidence that this person would be incapable of coming right, of ever gaining conscious and being able to be in that role. You actually have to go. It's not as straightforward as saying, oh, we'll get the rally to sign it and get him off the roll. It's actually a bit more complex than that.
Yeah.
But that's incredible that they had that discussion.
Yeah, and I got asked questions. I wouldn't say this was coming from the councillors. I think this was coming from inside the family, because I think they were in a I don't know what to do situation.
Oh, fair enough. But
Yeah,
don't preempt it.
And,
Don't rush it.
I mean, put it this way. It's the first time someone has been elected but unable to be sworn in New Zealand history for both central and local government politics, probably that we could remember.
I haven't heard of it at all. But
Yeah,
it's a scenario and it's happened, so there's a procedure in place for when it does.
well, they had one for what happens if someone dies during between nomination day and election day, known as the Port Waikato by-election.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, let's move on to Ingrid Leary for her speech in support.
Anybody who has interfaced with the Mental Health Act 1992 will know the trauma and the difficulty in grappling with really big issues around human rights, dealing with loved ones, dealing with crisis, dealing with safety. And as somebody who has used Section 12 of that Act twice on family members and had extensive experience with family members who have experienced mental health, I want to acknowledge that this is a very big and serious and important piece of legislation. And it is complex, it is always going to be contentious in some elements, and I want to congratulate the Minister for bringing it to the House, for building on the work that the Labor government did in getting it here. And I also want to thank him for his collaborative approach, for reaching out and providing us with a pre-reading briefing. We take on board his invitation to suggest at the Select Committee that we go around the regions and seek input from New Zealanders. It's certainly something I would support. And I also heard in his briefing the flexibility of the Minister to consider some of the more contentious elements. The bill does go a long way in terms of moving the 1992 current law from a very sort of bright line situation where people are either deemed requiring compulsory care or not into a much more nuanced approach. And so I'm not going to go into the differences. I think others can speak to them. But I'd like to just lay out some of the things that we would be very interested in as opposition to hear from submitters. We are cautious about certain areas of it. There is a change to the threshold that requires people to be kept under compulsory care. In some ways it looks to have been broader.